Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, a channel all about learning a language through the act of reading. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my absolute failure in Japanese and some of the lessons that I learned from failing in Japanese, and how I'm gonna how I've been encouraging myself to get back into it, because Japanese is still a language that I do want to learn. Let's start off with this right off the bat. This is the third time that I've tried recording this video because I could never quite get anything out the way that I wanted to, so we'll kind of see how it goes. So to start off with, let's talk about some of my failures in Japanese. I feel like I should start with the failures. One of my biggest failures was that, like I mentioned in my very first video, I was studying, I believe it was my very first video, I was studying Japanese off and on over the course of the past 6 years. And the biggest failure part of this, the reason that I call it a failure, is because if you listen to how I phrased that, I was studying Japanese off and on, off and on, and off and on and off and on. I don't remember how many times that I quit studying for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I think my longest stint of when I had quit studying was, I believe, 7 or 8 months. We were somewhere around there. And then I would get back into it, and I would do really well for a couple of months, and then I would fall off, and then I would do really well for another couple of months, and then I'd fall off. So that honestly was one of my biggest failures. Consistency. I was not being consistent with it. And that is something that, as I'm studying Spanish right now, I'm trying to fix with myself. I'm trying to be more consistent with how I'm doing it. Study every day. Use the same method. That brings me to my second failure, using the same method. I can't tell you how many times while I was learning Japanese that I went from this method to this method to this method to this application, this program over here. I had a little bit of Rosetta Stone sprinkled in there. I had some Duolingo over here. I had, it seemed like, everything under the sun. It's not necessarily true, but it sure as hell felt like it. And I think eventually my brain just got overwhelmed with how many different methods and theories and all this other stuff it was trying to take in, because it was just all different ways and methods of doing the same thing. And so my brain was just, at one point, was just like, I give up, dude. I don't know what you're doing. Which is exactly the point that I hit at the very end when I decided to quit Japanese for a while and let my brain rest, is that my brain had at that point completely given up. It would just shut down on me anytime that I pulled out my Japanese to study it, my Native Shark that I was using, program that I was using, my Japanese from Zero books, which I can't even find them, there they are, on my shelf over here. I was using those for a while. I was, like I said, I used Duolingo, I used Memrise. But anytime, by the end of it, anytime I pulled out whichever one I was using at the time, I felt like my brain immediately shut off. It immediately just checked out and was like, all right, you're on your own. Because I'm tired of this. I'm tired of your bullshit. I'm done with you. I'm going to go sit in the corner. When you're done messing around, then I'll come back. That's what it felt like my brain was doing. And so that was probably the second biggest reason that I ended up quitting Japanese for the time being. So I think that the biggest lessons to learn from my failures in Japanese for you guys is stay consistent, come back every day, and secondly, which kind of goes hand in hand with the first, pick 1 or 2. It can be 2. I think you probably shouldn't go with more than 2. It is possible, but I don't think it's a good idea. But pick 1 or 2 methods and stick to those. Don't change your method. That's what I'm doing right with this one, with my reading. Don't change your method. I have not picked up any other method in studying Spanish. When I first started, before I decided to do the reading thing, I had started to use the Speakly app a little bit, which I do really enjoy, and I'll do a video on that eventually. But it just wasn't working for me, much like anything else. But I used that to get a little bit of vocabulary to kind of remind myself of a little bit of the Spanish that I had already learned in high school. Some of the different simpler vocabulary words, things like that. But now I've switched to, now that I've figured out that reading works better for me, I have completely gone in full bore with the reading, and I have not, the only other thing that I've done is I'm doing some listening comprehension using Netflix, YouTube, things like that. That's the only other thing that I'm doing, which I don't see as a difference in like method. It's, to me, is still staying true to only use one method, or one or two methods. So, biggest takeaway from my failings in Japanese is those two things right there. Stay consistent, pick one or two methods or apps or whatever you're using, and stick to them. My third failing, and I didn't even think about mentioning this until just now, my third failing, which is arguably even more important than the other two, is motivation. If you get to the point, like, say you're really, really motivated to learn Mandarin Chinese, for one reason or another, doesn't matter the reason, it doesn't even have to be a good reason that most people think of as a good reason, for whatever reason, and then, 3 months in, all of a sudden you feel like you're not learning very much, you're having trouble going back and doing it. At that point, which is the point that I hit in Japanese, you have to examine, where did your motivation go? What motivated you to start doing this in the first place? For me, it was a desire to understand the culture of Japan, to understand their literature, their TV, their movies, their food, especially their food. That's a big one for me. I'll do a separate video about food at some point. But their food, just their country in general. I was motivated just to learn about Japan. But then my motivation started to kind of fall off. And I think partially this had to do with my ADHD kicking in, and I would go, ooh, look, shiny thing over here. And I would get distracted by said shiny thing for, sometimes just a couple of days, maybe. But long enough that my motivation just fell off, because then all of a sudden I forgot the reason that I started in the first place. And I could not get my brain to come back and say, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember this thing that we were absolutely motivated to do, that we absolutely loved? Do you remember it? No? Okay. And then just gave up. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I quit on numerous occasions, and why I was having so many issues by the end of it this time. So, how am I going to move forward in Japanese? That's kind of the whole point of this video, right? Is to talk about my failures in Japanese, which there's probably more that I could list. It's just, at a certain point, a lot of them become related. A lot of them become related to those three things that I already mentioned. But I mention all this to tell you how I'm going to move forward. So I have started using the reading method, my reading method, my hybrid reading method, I should say, for studying Spanish. And the idea for me is that I want to start using that same method with Japanese. Because I have four manga books down here in Japanese that I can use for this. Ollie Richards also has his story learning method out for Japanese, as well as a bunch of other languages that I want to learn. So I have that going for me as well. And then there's also an app called the Satori Reader, which I absolutely love, because it is essentially just a ton of different stories, and they're written in short chunks. They're essentially chapters. They call them articles, but they're written in short articles. They're easier to digest. They don't use watered down language or anything. It's just easier to digest. They just mark them out and say, this story is difficult, this story is not difficult, this one's kind of medium. That's kind of how they mark them out. And so moving forward back into Japanese, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be reading my manga, which I have three. I have the first 3 books of a manga called Yotsubato, which is about a little girl that has just moved with her dad to a different city or something like that. And then I also have Shirokuma Cafe, or Polar Bear Cafe, White Bear Cafe, whichever you want to call it. Shirokuma is white bear, or a polar bear. It literally translates as white bear. That's why I think that. So I have those 4, plus I have all the articles on the Satori Reader that I'm going to use. So am I going to do that right now? Not quite yet. My original plan was to pick those back up, some of that back up at the start of July. Obviously, it is not the start of July anymore. We're more like halfway to 3/4 of the way through July at this point. About halfway as of recording this. And so my intention now is to essentially, I don't necessarily want to wait till August. It might just be a little, maybe next week that I start it. But essentially, I'm going to pick up, probably just pick up Yotsubato, and I'm going to start reading through just little bits at a time, even if it's just a couple of pages, not to try to learn anything from it, just to make sure that I am not forgetting the script, the hiragana, the katakana, some of the kanji that I've learned, because I've learned actually quite a bit of kanji, which isn't necessarily as important to me at this stage, but I'm going to keep going with that just a little bit every day. Just a little bit, like 5-10 minutes at most. Then, once my Spanish starts to get up a little higher in level, and once I start to be able to speak in Spanish, which I'm really hoping to be able to do here before too terribly long, then I will look at fully diving back into Japanese alongside Spanish, and putting Spanish in essentially kind of a coast mode, a cruise control as it were. And that's kind of my intention moving forward. So I really hope that this helped some of you. I always felt like it helped me to see people like some of the polyglots, like Robin McPherson, and I think I remember seeing a video from Lindy Botas, something like that. I don't remember how to pronounce her last name. I apologize. But I remember watching videos from those two especially, where they talked about failing in language learning and or just struggling in language learning, and that's the kind of transparency I want. I don't want to be like, oh yeah, it's always going so great and everything is just, hunky-dory, and when in all reality I'm like, I'm doing terrible. I don't know what the heck I'm doing anymore. I don't even know if I want to do this. Because let's be real, we all hit that, regardless of what it is, language learning, whatever. We all hit that point where we're just like, this isn't going well and I don't want to do it anymore. So, with all that being said, that is it for me for today. Like I said, I hope that this helped some of you, and I hope that you all join me in the next video. So, until then, I will see you all next time.